Hey everyone, welcome back to another Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're tackling a topic that affects quite literally every single one of us. I mean, have you ever wondered why, even in the absolute best relationships, we can sometimes feel like we're speaking completely different languages? Well, today we're exploring the evolutionary mechanics of relationship conflict. We're going to look at the hard data to understand why our ancient biology sometimes makes our modern romantic lives so incredibly complicated. So let's kick things off with a pretty wild universal paradox. Men and women need each other to survive, right? Cooperation between the sexes is a fundamental, cardinal feature of human history. We fall in love, we choose each other, we build families. And yet, somehow we are evolutionarily wired to bump heads. Why do we constantly clash over everything from the timing of physical intimacy to, seemingly harmless interactions at a party? Okay, let's dive right in by establishing our core scientific lens for today's explainer, strategic interference theory. This theory tells us something profound. Relationship conflict isn't usually some intentional, malicious war. It actually occurs when one person is using a particular strategy to achieve an evolutionary goal, and another person, just by going after their own distinct goal, blocks that strategy. So the conflict is literally just a byproduct of competing genetic interests. Here's the roadmap for our explainer today. We're going to cover 1. The evolutionary battleground. 2. Misreading signals and intentions. 3. The dark side of mating. 4. The evolutionary jealousy divide. And 5. Tactics of mate retention. Section 1. The evolutionary battleground, moving past the myths. To truly understand strategic interference, we kind of need to completely rethink how we view conflict between the sexes. The crucial point here is that the whole popular idea of a battle of the sexes, it's actually a total myth. Men are not united as some group against women, and women aren't united as a group against men. In evolutionary terms, individuals compete primarily with members of their own sex for the best mates. Strategic interference happens on an individual level. Think about it. It happens when a man's desire for a short-term mating strategy collides head-on with a woman's desire to secure a long-term, committed strategy before moving forward. Moving on to Section 2, misreading signals and intentions in the dating game. Have you ever wondered how our brains actively trick us during the early stages of courtship? It turns out miscommunication in dating isn't just you being awkward, it's an inherited survival mechanism. To explain this, we use error management theory. Think of your brain like a hypersensitive smoke alarm in your house. It's designed to be biased. A smoke alarm will occasionally go off when you burn toast because, well, the cost of a false alarm is just a momentary annoyance, while the cost of failing to detect a real fire is completely catastrophic. Evolution wired our mind-reading mechanisms exactly the same way. We're biased to make the inferential error that cost us the absolute least in terms of reproductive success. And this brilliantly illustrates how those smoke alarms differ by sex. Men generally have a sexual overperception bias. They're wired to over-infer sexual interest from women, literally seeing flirtation where there's only friendliness, because historically, missing a reproductive opportunity was evolutionarily costly. Women, on the other hand, carry a commitment skepticism bias. They naturally underestimate early declarations of romantic commitment. Why? Because the ancestral cost to a woman of being sexually deceived and abandoned to raise a child alone was incredibly severe. Now, what's absolutely fascinating about this data is just how universal it actually is. When comparing average judgments of sexual intent in both Brazil and the United States, despite massive cultural differences, the result is exactly the same. The data consistently shows men scoring higher than women. Men are reliably perceiving more sexual intent in the exact same social encounters. It's wild, right? All right, Section 3. The dark side of meeting, misfires, and coercion. Now, we need to talk about when these evolutionary mechanisms misfire or are weaponized, because the results can be profoundly damaging. When examining workplace sexual harassment strictly through an evolutionary lens, the data reveals very specific patterns. Perpetrators are heavily driven by a short-term mating strategy, and there's a strong correlation with the dark triad personality traits. That's narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Power dynamics and these dark traits exploit evolutionary mechanisms, and the data clearly shows that the victims of this harassment are disproportionately young, single women. Furthermore, evolutionary psychology presents competing theories regarding sexual coercion.
Adaptation theory proposes that there are specialized, evolved traits for coercion in very specific circumstances. Conversely, the byproduct theory suggests that coercion is entirely non-adaptive, that it's basically a byproduct of general male aggression and a desire for sexual variety. Alongside these theories, researchers study co-evolved female defenses. These include specialized fears that motivate avoiding risky situations, particularly during ovulation, or the formation of protective social coalitions.
This brings us to Section 4, the evolutionary jealousy divide, protecting the investments. I want you to take a second and consider why infidelity hurts so much. It's a devastating emotional experience, but evolutionary science tells us that the root of that pain differs significantly between the sexes. Both men and women experience profound jealousy, but the triggers differ because our ancestral threats differed. For a man, the ultimate evolutionary threat is cuckoldery, basically investing a lifetime of resources into a rival's child. Therefore, male jealousy is intensely triggered by sexual infidelity. For a woman, well, maternity is always certain. Her evolutionary threat was a mate diverting crucial time, protection, and resources to another woman and her children. Therefore, female jealousy is deeply triggered by emotional infidelity. This data right here highlights 4 critical tests where people actually had to choose what would upset them more, their partner having sex with someone else or their partner falling in love with someone else. The results are pretty striking. Men overwhelmingly report far more distress over sexual infidelity, while women consistently report far more distress over emotional infidelity. And you know what? It isn't just in their heads, it's literally in their bodies. When subjects were hooked up to physiological monitors, men imagining sexual infidelity saw their heart rates accelerate by roughly the equivalent of drinking 3 strong cups of coffee all at once. Meanwhile, women imagining emotional infidelity exhibited noticeably increased contraction in their facial corrugator muscles, which means intense frowning and distress. Our ancestral wiring causes very real, visceral physical reactions to different types of betrayal. Which leads us to our final section, Section 5, Tactics of Mate Retention, from Vigilance to Violence. So, once a mate is gained, how do people keep them from leaving or being poached by rivals? Well, the behaviors span a wild, sometimes unsettling spectrum. Research categorizes these retention tactics clearly. Men are more likely to lean toward resource display, like buying gifts or taking partners out to expensive restaurants, as well as concealment, basically trying to monopolize a partner's time. Women, on the other hand, more frequently use appearance enhancement and, fascinatingly, jealousy induction. Women will sometimes intentionally flirt with others just to test the strength of the relationship and gauge a partner's commitment. To really ground all this dense theory in real human emotion, listen to this quote regarding Greek culture from back in 1969. It describes how a wife's infidelity turns a husband into a keratos, an incredibly shameful epithet implying weakness. This perfectly illustrates that evolutionary drives don't just exist in a vacuum. They shape severe cultural consequences and very real human shame. And the thing is, these retention behaviors aren't static. They dial up or down based entirely on context. A man's possessive tactics measurably increase based on his partner's reproductive value, specifically her youth, physical attractiveness, and even her ovulation cycle. Conversely, a woman's mate retention tactics intensify when her husband's income rises or when he exhibits high status striving, meaning he's actively out there working to climb the social and economic hierarchy. At the extreme end of this spectrum, mate retention can take the destructive form of spousal violence. Researchers theorize that violence and extreme control are sometimes weaponized as a high-risk deterrence strategy. It's used to severely limit a partner's autonomy, deter relationship defection, and tragically, to increase the credibility of future threats. So, what should you actually take away from all this data? Well, the crucial point is that relationship conflict is not the ultimate goal. Nature doesn't actually want you to be miserable in your relationships. This friction is simply an evolutionary byproduct. Our ancestors successfully passed down differing, highly specialized reproductive strategies, and today, those ancient strategies are just constantly bumping into each other right in our modern living rooms. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly important question to chew on. Now that we can clearly see the evolutionary software driving our biases, our jealousy, and our relationship conflicts, do we finally have the conscious power to override it? Understanding our biology might just be the very first step to choosing how we let it control our lives. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.